Judge Alistair Cole, I have a warrant for your arrest.
This is absurd. On what grounds?
The sun was relentless, a white-hot glare that bleached the color from the immaculate suburban landscape of Crestwood Hills. For Officer David Evans, only 6 weeks out of the academy, the heat felt less oppressive than the profound sense of order. Every lawn was a perfect green rectangle, every driveway was swept clean, and every house stood as a monument to quiet, upper-middle-class success. It was the kind of neighborhood where trouble felt like an alien concept, a headline from a different part of the city. That was why the call, a vandalism report from a sitting Superior Court judge, had sent a ripple of muted urgency through the precinct. Now, standing on the shimmering asphalt of Judge Alistair Cole's driveway, Evans felt the weight of the badge on his chest, a heavy reminder of his inexperience. Judge Cole met him at the door. He was younger than Evans had expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with a sharp, intelligent face, impeccably styled dark hair, and the kind of easy confidence that seemed woven into his DNA. He was dressed in tailored slacks and a crisp polo shirt, looking more like he'd just stepped off a yacht than the victim of a crime. He offered a firm handshake and a practiced, disarming smile. "Officer Evans, thank you for the prompt response," he said, his voice calm and measured, the voice of a man accustomed to absolute control. He gestured toward the driveway where a gleaming black sedan sat parked. The driver's side was defaced by a long, jagged scratch that ran from fender to taillight, a brutal scar across the car's flawless finish. Alongside it, scrawled in thick, angry red spray paint, was a single, profane word. "I have the entire incident on my security camera," Judge Cole stated, leading Evans toward a large monitor inside his cool, spacious entryway. "The system is top of the line. It captures everything in high definition." He tapped a few keys on a tablet, and the screen came to life. The footage was shockingly clear. A figure, lean and dressed in a dark hoodie, could be seen approaching the vehicle. The person moved with a furtive haste, first carving the metal with a sharp object, then shaking a can of spray paint and leaving their mark. The entire act took less than 30 seconds. "Now watch this," the judge said, his finger tracing a line on the screen. He zoomed in on the moment the figure turned to flee. For a split second, the hood fell back, revealing a face. It was grainy, but distinct enough. Judge Cole then swiped to a different image, a crisp, professional headshot of a young black man. His name is Leo Maxwell. He's 26, lives over on the east side. He did some contract landscaping work for my neighbor last month. I recognized him the moment I saw the footage. The judge's tone was one of finality, as if he were delivering a verdict from the bench. The evidence seemed airtight, a prosecutor's dream. A clear motive, a disgruntled contractor perhaps, and undeniable video proof. A second patrol car pulled up then, and 2 officers escorted a man from the back seat. It was Leo Maxwell. He was tall and slender, wearing a faded t-shirt and work jeans. But it wasn't his clothes that struck Evans. It was his eyes. They were wide with a terror so profound it seemed to swallow all other emotions. His hands were cuffed in front of him, and he trembled visibly as the officers led him to stand before the judge's pristine home. He looked at the defaced car, then at Judge Cole, and a choked sob escaped his lips. "I didn't do this," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I swear to God, I didn't do this." Judge Cole crossed his arms, his expression a mask of stern disappointment. "The video doesn't lie, Mr. Maxwell." "That's not me. It looks like me, but it's not me." Leo's voice cracked, rising in desperation. "I was at my sister's place all morning. All morning. You can ask her. Please, you have to ask her." Tears streamed freely down his face now, tracing paths through the dust on his cheeks. He wasn't defiant. He wasn't angry. He was simply broken. His fear was a raw, physical thing, a stark contrast to the judge's unshakable composure. Evans had been trained to be objective, to trust evidence over emotion. The academy instructors had drilled it into them. A suspect's denial was predictable, a part of the script. But something about this scene felt wrong. It was too neat, too perfect. The judge's evidence was flawless, his demeanor unimpeachable, and Leo Maxwell's terror felt too genuine to be a performance. The young officer stood between a pillar of the community and a terrified, weeping man, and for the first time in his short career, the clear line between right and wrong began to blur under the harsh morning sun. He looked at the video, at the tear-streaked face of the accused, and at the judge's cold, certain eyes. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. It was a feeling he couldn't name, a quiet but insistent whisper that told him the story presented here, as clear and simple as it seemed, was a carefully constructed lie. Back at the precinct, the air was thick with the familiar smell of burnt coffee and paperwork. The hum of computers and the murmur of distant conversations formed a constant low-grade thrum that usually felt comforting to Evans, the sound of the system at work. But today, it felt oppressive. He sat at his designated cubicle, the bare gray walls still feeling foreign, and stared at the preliminary incident report on his screen. The cursor blinked rhythmically, waiting for a narrative that should have been simple to write. Subject identified via security footage. Apprehended and read his rights. Subject denies involvement. Case closed. It was a textbook arrest. By all accounts, it was a win for the department, a quick and efficient resolution for a high-profile victim. Yet he couldn't bring himself to type. His mind kept replaying the scene in Judge Cole's driveway. Not the vandalism, not the video, but the look in Leo Maxwell's eyes. In his brief time on the force, Evans had seen his share of denials. He'd seen the swaggering bravado of gang members caught red-handed, the sullen silence of shoplifters, the practiced indignation of drunk drivers. They all had a certain texture, a defensiveness that felt like a shield. Leo's denial had felt different. It was raw, desperate, the plea of a man watching his world crumble for a reason he couldn't comprehend. It was the terror of the powerless, not the anger of the guilty. His partner for the day, a veteran officer named Henderson with 20 years on the job, clapped him on the shoulder as he walked by. "Good collar, Rook," he said, nodding toward the report. "Bagging a perp who hit a judge? The brass'll love that. Quick and clean." Evans forced a tight smile. "Yeah, clean." But it didn't feel clean. It felt sterile, contrived. He thought about Judge Alistair Cole. The man's composure had been absolute. There was no rage, no sense of violation that a normal person would feel after having their property destroyed. Instead, there was a calm, almost satisfied certainty. He had the culprit, the video, the confessionless conviction all wrapped up before the first patrol car had even arrived. He hadn't been a victim reporting a crime. He'd been a prosecutor presenting a finished case. The efficiency of it all was what gnawed at Evans. How had Cole identified Leo Maxwell so quickly? "He did some landscaping for my neighbor last month." It was a plausible explanation, but it felt thin. Would you really remember the face of a contract worker you saw in passing well enough to identify him from a grainy, fleeting night vision video? Evans minimized the report and opened a new browser tab. He typed Leo Maxwell into the county's public records database. The results were sparse. A couple of traffic tickets years old. No criminal record. No history of violence, theft, or vandalism. He was, by all appearances, an ordinary man. He ran a small, independent landscaping business with his father. Evans found the business's social media page, pictures of neatly trimmed hedges, vibrant flower beds, and smiling clients. The most recent post was from the previous day, showing Leo and his father finishing a large commercial project, their faces tired but proud. It didn't paint the picture of a man who would risk his livelihood for a petty act of vandalism. Then he searched for Judge Alistair Cole. The man was a rising star in the legal community. Appointed to the bench at an astonishingly young age, he was known for his sharp intellect and his tough-on-crime stance. He was the son of a real estate mogul, Jonathan Cole, a man whose name was plastered on buildings all over the city. The Coles were old money, a local dynasty with deep roots and deeper influence. Alistair Cole was the polished, public-facing scion of that dynasty, his reputation immaculate. Evans leaned back in his chair, the squeak of the worn leather filling the silence of his cubicle. The pieces didn't fit. On one side, you had a powerful judge from an influential family. On the other, a small-time landscaper with a clean record. And in the middle, a perfect piece of video evidence that felt just a little too perfect. He remembered Leo's desperate alibi. "I was at my sister's place all morning. You can ask her." An alibi from a family member was typically considered weak, easily dismissed as biased. But what if it was true? What if, at the exact moment the hooded figure was scratching the judge's car, Leo Maxwell was miles away, playing with his niece or helping his sister fix a leaky faucet? The thought was dangerous. To question this case meant questioning the word of a sitting judge. It meant questioning a piece of seemingly incontrovertible digital evidence. For a rookie officer, a man still on probation, it was professional suicide. The smart move was to finish the report, file it, and move on to the next call. It was to trust the system, to trust the evidence, to trust the respected member of the judiciary over the weeping man in handcuffs. But his father's voice echoed in his memory, a constant refrain from his childhood. "The truth doesn't always shout, David. Sometimes it whispers. Your job is to be quiet enough to hear it." Right now, the truth was whispering. It was a faint, unsettling tremor beneath the surface of a flawless case. Evans looked at the blinking cursor on the screen. He typed the first few lines of the report, describing the scene as he found it. But then he stopped. He couldn't bring himself to write the concluding sentence that would seal Leo Maxwell's fate. Not yet. He closed the file, saved it as a draft, and stood up. The precinct hummed around him, a machine moving forward. But David Evans felt a sudden, powerful need to walk in the opposite direction. The next day after his shift ended, Evans changed out of his uniform into a plain t-shirt and jeans. He drove his own car, a nondescript sedan, back to Crestwood Hills. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. The oppressive heat of midday had given way to a pleasant evening warmth. The neighborhood was quiet. The only sounds the distant whir of a lawnmower and the cheerful shrieks of children playing in a backyard pool. It felt a world away from the tension and despair of yesterday morning. He parked a block away from Judge Cole's residence and started walking, feeling conspicuous in the tranquil suburban setting. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. A contradiction, a detail out of place, anything to validate the gnawing doubt in his gut. His first stop was the house next to the judge's, the one where Leo Maxwell had supposedly worked. An older woman was watering her prize-winning roses in the front yard. Evans gave her a friendly wave. "Evening," he said. "Beautiful garden you have." The woman, whose name was Mrs. Gable, beamed with pride. "Oh, thank you. It's my pride and joy." Evans gestured vaguely toward the judge's house. "Quite a commotion over there yesterday. I saw the police cars on my way to work." He was careful to present himself as just a curious neighbor, not an investigating officer. Mrs. Gable's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Oh, it was terrible. Poor Judge Cole, having his lovely car vandalized like that. This neighborhood used to be so safe." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "They caught the fellow who did it, you know. One of the workers who did my lawn last month. Can you believe the nerve?" "That's what I heard," Evans said, keeping his tone neutral. "Did you happen to see or hear anything that morning?" She shook her head, pursing her lips. "Not a thing. My husband and I are early risers, but our bedroom is on the other side of the house. The first we knew of it was when the police arrived." She pointed her watering can down the street. "But Mr. Henderson, 4 doors down, he heard something. He's retired, sits on his porch every morning with his coffee and the newspaper. He might be your man if you're looking for gossip." Evans thanked her and ambled down the street to Mr. Henderson's house. Just as Mrs. Gable had described, an elderly man with a shock of white hair sat in a rocking chair on his porch, a steaming mug in his hand. Evans introduced himself and repeated his story about being a concerned neighbor. Mr. Henderson squinted at him over the rim of his glasses. "You a cop?" he asked bluntly. Evans was taken aback. "What makes you say that?" "The shoes," the old man said, pointing a gnarled finger. "Practical, sturdy, and the way you stand. You're not relaxing, you're observing. I was a Marine for 30 years. I know the look." Evans sighed, his cover blown. "Officer David Evans," he admitted, offering his hand. "I'm looking into the incident at Judge Cole's house, off the clock." Mr. Henderson's expression softened slightly. He shook Evans's hand. "Knew it. So what's the official story not telling you?" "The judge's camera says the vandalism happened at 5:15 a.m., Evans said. "Did you hear anything around that time?" The old man took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes distant as he thought. 5:15? No. The paper boy is the only thing moving at that hour, and he's quiet as a mouse. The first noise I heard was a car, an engine turning over. That was earlier, though, much earlier." "How much earlier?" Evans pressed, his pulse quickening. "Must have been just before 4:30, Henderson said confidently. "I know because the automatic sprinklers next door always kick on at 4:30, and I heard the car just before that hiss. It wasn't a loud engine, one of those fancy quiet ones. It pulled up, idled for maybe a minute, and then drove off. I didn't think anything of it at the time." This was something. The judge's pristine video showed no approaching car. The footage began with the hooded figure already on the property, as if he had appeared out of thin air. "Did you see the car?" "Just the headlights sweeping across my window," he said. "Didn't get a make or model, but it came from the direction of the judge's house and left the same way." A car arriving and leaving nearly 45 minutes before the crime supposedly took place. It was a loose thread. Evans thanked Mr. Henderson for his time and continued his walk, his mind racing. He passed the judge's house again, this time looking at it with a more critical eye. He noticed the placement of the security camera. It was positioned perfectly to capture the driveway and the front of the house, but its angle created a significant blind spot near the curb and the large oak tree on the edge of the property. Someone could easily park there, get out, and approach the driveway without ever being seen by that camera. He completed his loop of the block, stopping to chat with a few more people, a jogger, a man washing his car. None had seen the vandalism itself, but he pieced together a slightly different timeline. The street was generally dead quiet until the first commuters started leaving around 6 a.m. The idea that a vandal would strike at 5:15 a.m. when the risk of being seen was beginning to increase felt off. But a car arriving at 4:30 a.m. in the deepest dark before dawn, that felt more plausible for someone trying to avoid detection. As he got back into his car, Evans felt a growing conviction that Judge Cole's narrative was not just flawed, but deliberately fabricated. The timing was wrong. The video was too perfect, likely edited to show only what the judge wanted the police to see. The hooded figure could have been anyone. The facial recognition was a subjective judgment made by a man who now seemed to have a questionable agenda. But why? Why would a respected judge go to such elaborate lengths to frame a landscaper? It seemed insane, a level of vindictiveness that defied logic. There had to be a deeper story, a motive hidden far from the pristine lawns and quiet streets of Crestwood Hills. The whispers he'd heard on his walk weren't just gossip. They were the first signs of a carefully buried truth. His next step was to start digging. The following Saturday, Evans traded the sun-drenched streets of the city for the cool, dusty archives of the public library. Surrounded by the scent of old paper and binding glue, he dove into a world far removed from his daily police work. He wasn't looking for criminal records anymore. He was looking for a connection, a history, a reason for the seemingly inexplicable animosity Judge Cole held for Leo Maxwell. If the frame-up was as elaborate as he suspected, the motive had to be powerful and deeply rooted. He started with the two names that anchored the whole affair, Cole and Maxwell. He began with the Coles. As he'd discovered earlier, Judge Alistair Cole's father was Jonathan Cole, a titan of the local real estate and development industry. For hours, Evans scrolled through microfilm, reading old newspaper articles from the city's business section. The story of Cole development was one of ruthless ambition and staggering success. Jonathan Cole had built an empire by buying up land, developing luxury condos, and transforming the city's skyline. He was portrayed as a visionary, a philanthropist, and a formidable businessman who rarely lost a negotiation. The articles were filled with photos of him at charity galas, cutting ribbons at new building openings, and shaking hands with politicians. He was the very picture of established power. Alistair, his son, was often mentioned in passing. A brilliant student, a star debater, destined to carry the family's legacy into the legal and political arenas. Then Evans started searching for the Maxwell name. It took longer, the references fewer and farther between, but eventually he found it. Maxwell and Son Construction. It was a smaller, family-owned business, founded by Leo Maxwell's grandfather, Samuel Maxwell. In the business world of the city, they were David to Cole Development's Goliath. They specialized in smaller commercial projects and historical building restorations, known for their craftsmanship and reliability. The first hint of a connection came from an article dated nearly 25 years ago. The headline read, "Downtown Revitalization Project Sparks Bitter Bidding War." The city council was seeking bids for a massive project to redevelop a historic waterfront district. Two companies had emerged as the finalists: the massive, well-funded Cole Development and the smaller, respected Maxwell and Son Construction. Jonathan Cole proposed a complete demolition to make way for modern high-rises. Sam Maxwell, on the other hand, presented an ambitious plan to restore the historic facades while modernizing the interiors, preserving the district's character. According to the article, the public and several council members heavily favored the Maxwell plan. It seemed poised to win, but at the 11th hour, a scandal erupted. An anonymous tip led inspectors to one of Maxwell and Son's current construction sites, where they discovered a series of alleged safety violations. The story blew up. The media, fueled by whispers of corporate negligence, painted the Maxwells as cutting corners and endangering workers. Their reputation took a massive hit. With their credibility shattered, the city council awarded the lucrative waterfront contract to Jonathan Cole. Evans felt a jolt of recognition. It was a ghost of the same tactic, a sudden, reputation-destroying accusation that appeared out of nowhere. He kept digging. A few weeks after Cole won the bid, a small follow-up article was buried on page B12. It mentioned that the safety violations at the Maxwell site were later found to be less severe than initially reported, and most fines were quietly dropped. But the damage was done. Maxwell and Son Construction lost the biggest contract in its history and suffered a blow from which it never fully recovered. Samuel Maxwell was quoted in the piece, his words laced with a quiet fury. "We were set up," he'd said. "Our record was clean for 40 years. This was no accident." The trail didn't end there. Evans found more articles over the years detailing the fallout. The Maxwells struggled, downsizing their operations significantly. Jonathan Cole's waterfront project, meanwhile, became the cornerstone of his empire, making him one of the wealthiest men in the state. There was no direct proof linking Cole to the anonymous tip, but the timing was impossibly convenient. It was a story of a corporate giant crushing a smaller rival through underhanded means. This, Evans realized, was the root of it. This was the original sin. It wasn't just business, it was personal. It was a generational grudge. Samuel Maxwell had passed his company and his resentment down to his son, who had passed it down to Leo. And Jonathan Cole had likely passed his disdain and his playbook down to his own son, Alistair. The judge wasn't just the son of a real estate mogul, he was the heir to a feud. He would have grown up hearing stories of the Maxwells as obstacles, as rivals who needed to be put in their place. Suddenly, the frame-up of Leo Maxwell wasn't just a bizarre act of malice, it was a chilling echo of the past. It was Alistair Cole, armed with the power of the bench instead of anonymous tip-offs, finishing what his father had started. He wasn't just vandalizing a man's reputation. He was continuing a campaign to systematically dismantle a family that had dared to stand in his family's way. The pristine veneer of Judge Cole, the rising star of the judiciary, cracked in Evans's mind, revealing something ugly and venomous beneath. He was a man not serving justice, but wielding his power to settle an old, bitter score. The kid gloves were off. Evans now knew he wasn't just investigating a simple case of vandalism. He was uncovering a conspiracy decades in the making, and he was completely, terrifyingly out of his depth. The weight of his discovery settled on Evans like a physical burden. He was a rookie, 6 weeks on the job, with a half-formed theory that accused a sitting judge, a member of one of the city's most powerful families, of orchestrating a criminal conspiracy rooted in a decades-old grudge. He had no hard evidence, only a collection of whispers, inconsistencies, and old newspaper clippings. To take this to his superiors would be professional suicide. They would dismiss him as a paranoid, overzealous rookie. He'd be laughed out of the sergeant's office and likely relegated to desk duty for the rest of his probationary period. He needed help. He needed someone who would listen, someone with the experience to see the pattern he was seeing and the authority to help him navigate the treacherous political waters ahead. There was only one person who came to mind: Sergeant Regina Wallace. Sergeant Wallace was a legend in the precinct, a 25-year veteran who had seen it all. She ran the robbery-homicide unit with a firm hand and an even sharper mind. She was tough, demanding, and had a built-in no BS detector that could spot a lie from 100 yards away. Rookies were terrified of her, but veteran cops respected her immensely. She was known for two things: her uncanny ability to close impossible cases and her unwavering integrity. She played by the rules, but she was fiercely loyal to the truth, no matter how inconvenient it might be. Approaching her was a massive risk. If she thought his theory was garbage, she would tell him so in no uncertain terms, and likely warn him to drop it before he destroyed his career. But if she believed him, she was his only hope. He found her in the precinct's small, cluttered break room at the end of her shift, pouring herself a cup of what looked like tar-black coffee. She looked tired, the lines around her eyes etched a little deeper than usual. Evans hovered nervously in the doorway until she finally looked up, her gaze sharp and questioning. "Something you need, Evans?" she asked, her voice raspy. He took a deep breath. "Sergeant, I need your advice. On a sensitive matter. Off the record." Wallace raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest cutting through her fatigue. "Off the record? You've been on the job less than 2 months. What kind of sensitive matter could you possibly have?" She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Spit it out. I don't have all night." For the next 20 minutes, Evans laid out his case. He spoke quietly but methodically, starting with the unease he felt at the crime scene, the perfect evidence, and Leo Maxwell's genuine terror. He detailed his off-duty visit to the neighborhood, the neighbor's account of an early morning car, and the blind spots in the judge's security camera coverage. He then presented his findings from the library archives, connecting the dots between the current case and the bitter business rivalry between the Cole and Maxwell families from a generation ago. He laid it all out, expecting her to cut him off at any moment, to tell him he was crazy. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. She took slow sips of her coffee, her eyes never leaving his, weighing every word. When he finally finished, the silence in the room was deafening. He had put all his cards on the table, exposed his career to the judgment of this one formidable woman. Wallace set her mug down with a soft click. She was silent for a full minute, and Evans's heart pounded in his chest. "A generational feud," she said at last, her voice flat. "You're telling me that a Superior Court judge, a man on the fast track to the appellate court, risked his entire future to frame a landscaper over a business deal that happened before he was even a teenager?" "When you put it like that, it sounds insane," Evans admitted, his confidence wavering. "But the pattern, the way the Maxwell's reputation was destroyed back then, and the way it's happening to Leo now, it's the same playbook." "The playbook of the rich and powerful," Wallace finished his sentence. a flicker of something, cynicism, maybe recognition, in her eyes. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Let me be clear, Evans. What you're doing is beyond dangerous. You're not just accusing a judge, you're accusing a Cole. Their roots in this city are deeper than the sewer lines. If you're wrong, you're not just fired, you're done. You'll be lucky to get a job as a mall cop in another state." "I know the risk, Sergeant," Evans said, his voice steady. "But I also know that Leo Maxwell is sitting in a county jail cell right now, his life ruined, for a crime I'm convinced he didn't commit. I can't just file the report and let that happen." For the first time since he'd started talking, Sergeant Wallace's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She saw past the rookie uniform to the conviction driving him. She saw the same fire that had driven her when she was a young officer. She drummed her fingers on the table, her mind clearly working, calculating angles and risks. "Okay," she said finally, the single word hanging in the air. "I'm not saying I believe you. I'm saying your doubt is reasonable. But hunches and old newspaper articles aren't evidence. They won't stand up to a whisper, let alone a Cole. If you want to pursue this, you need something concrete, something that ties Judge Cole directly to this frame-up." Relief washed over Evans so intensely he felt lightheaded. She hadn't thrown him out. "What do we do?" he asked, the "we" slipping out unintentionally. Wallace's lips curved into a wry, tired smile. "You do nothing. You go back to your desk, you finish that report on the vandalism, and you make it look like you've closed the book on this. You act like the model rookie. The last thing we need is for Cole to know he's being watched. I, on the other hand, will make a few discreet inquiries. There are ways to pull on threads without the whole sweater unraveling. Let's start with the judge's digital footprint. People like him, people who think they're smarter than everyone else, they always leave a trace." True to her word, Sergeant Wallace moved with a discretion that bordered on invisibility. To the rest of the precinct, Officer Evans was back to being a rookie learning the ropes, handling minor disputes and traffic stops, his brief, high-profile collar already fading into the daily churn of police work. He filed the report on the vandalism at Judge Cole's house, writing a dry, factual account based on the evidence presented. He documented Leo Maxwell's denial and his alibi as required, but offered no personal speculation. He was the picture of a diligent but unremarkable officer. On the inside, however, every day was a lesson in patience and anxiety. He trusted Wallace, but the silence was unnerving. Nearly a week later, Wallace called him into her small, cramped office. She shut the door, a rare occurrence that signaled the conversation was not for public consumption. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in dim, striped light. On her desk was a thin folder. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I started by looking at the judge's financials," she began, her voice low. "Everything is clean, too clean. Trusts, holding companies, wealth managers. His money is buttoned up so tight you'd need a team of forensic accountants a year to find a misplaced dime. It's a dead end for now." She tapped the folder. "But his digital life is a different story." She explained that getting a warrant for a judge's personal phone records based on a rookie's hunch was impossible. It would never be approved. So she'd used a different, more subtle method. She hadn't pulled his personal records, but she had submitted a departmental request for the cell tower data logs for the area around Judge Cole's home and Leo Maxwell's known locations for the 48 hours surrounding the incident. The request was framed as part of a broader, unrelated investigation into a series of burglaries in that part of the city. It was a clever bureaucratic maneuver, a way to get the information she needed without raising any red flags pointing directly at Cole. "The data is a mess," she said, opening the folder to reveal pages of dense numerical data. "Thousands of calls pinging off those towers, but when you know what you're looking for, patterns emerge." She had cross-referenced the call logs with the known phone numbers for Judge Cole, his family, and his office. As expected, most of his activity was routine. But then she found the anomaly. 3 calls, she said, pointing to a highlighted row of numbers. The night before the vandalism, all made from a tower near Cole's house, all to the same number. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It contained a single phone number. This number doesn't belong to anyone in his contact list. In fact, it doesn't belong to anyone at all. It's a burner phone, unregistered, bought with cash, activated 2 days before the incident. Evans felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the first piece of concrete evidence that suggested clandestine activity. Where did the calls go? That's the interesting part, Wallace continued. The burner phone was on the move. The first call pinged a tower downtown. The second, about an hour later, was from a tower on the east side, not far from where Leo Maxwell lives. And the third, just after midnight, was from a tower only a few blocks from the judge's own neighborhood, Crestwood Hills. The burner phone was circling, moving into position. But Wallace wasn't finished. It gets better. After the third call, the burner phone goes silent. No more outgoing calls, but it receives one more ping, an incoming call at 4:28 a.m. Evans' eyes widened. Just before the time Mr. Henderson heard the car. Exactly, Wallace confirmed. And the call that came into the burner phone? It came from Judge Alistair Cole's personal cell phone. He was careful enough to use a burner to make his outgoing calls, but he got sloppy. He made one call from his own damn phone. He probably thought it was safe, that no one would ever have a reason to look. It was a short call, less than 30 seconds, long enough to give a final command. Go now. The pieces clicked into place with chilling clarity. The judge had an accomplice, someone he had contacted via a secret disposable phone. This accomplice had scouted Leo's neighborhood, then moved into position near the judge's house. The final call at 4:28 a.m. was the green light. The accomplice had then driven to the house, committed the act of vandalism, and disappeared, all while the judge was safely in his home, ready to play the part of the surprised victim. The security video was never meant to be a complete record. It was a prop, edited to start only when the actor was on stage. "This changes everything," Evans said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is proof of a conspiracy." "It's proof of a suspicious phone call," Wallace corrected him, her pragmatism acting as an anchor to his excitement. "It's a powerful lead, but it's not enough to get a warrant for the judge. A defense attorney would tear it apart. They'd claim he misdialed, or that it was a call to a confidential informant for a case he was presiding over. We need to know who was holding that burner phone. That person is our link. That person is the key to bringing this whole thing down." The hunt was no longer just about the judge. It was about finding his ghost. With the discovery of the burner phone, the investigation gained a new, sharper focus. While Wallace began the painstaking work of trying to identify the mystery accomplice, she tasked Evans with a different objective: to prove a pattern of behavior. The phone call was their best lead, but a skilled lawyer could still dismiss it as an isolated, explainable anomaly. To build a compelling case for a prosecutor, they needed to show that Judge Cole had a history of using his position to target the Maxwell family. The old newspaper stories about the bidding war were a start, but they were circumstantial. They needed something more recent, something that demonstrated Alistair Cole's personal involvement. Evans started where the power was most concentrated: City Hall. He spent days poring over public records, zoning applications, and business permits. He was looking for any official interaction between the city's bureaucracy and the two family businesses within the last few years. It was a tedious, soul-crushing process, a search for a needle in a haystack of bureaucratic paperwork. After 3 days of fruitless searching, he finally found it. It was a permit application filed 18 months prior by Maxwell and Son Construction. They were seeking to expand their small commercial yard, a move that would have allowed them to take on more significant projects and hire more staff. The application was for a routine zoning variance. According to the notes in the file, it had been pre-approved by the Planning Commission and was expected to sail through the final City Council vote. It represented a chance for the Maxwells to finally recover some of the ground they had lost years ago. But it had been denied. At the final vote, the council had inexplicably reversed the Planning Commission's recommendation and rejected the permit, citing vague concerns about noise complaints and environmental impact that had never been raised before. The denial had been a major financial setback for the Maxwells, halting their growth in its tracks. On the surface, there was nothing to link this to Judge Cole. He was in the judicial branch, not municipal government. He shouldn't have had any influence on a zoning decision. But Evans, remembering the stories of the Cole family's deep connections, started digging into the city council members who had voted against the permit. 3 of them had changed their votes at the last minute, swinging the decision. He ran their names through a campaign finance database. All 3 had received substantial, though legal, campaign donations from a variety of real estate developers. And the largest single contributor to all 3 of their most recent campaigns was a political action committee called Future Forward for the City. The PAC's mission statement was full of lofty language about promoting responsible development and economic growth. But when Evans looked at its list of donors, his breath caught in his throat. The primary benefactor, the man who had funded nearly 70% of the PAC's activities, was Jonathan Cole, the judge's father. Enlisted as a member of the PAC's advisory board, a prestigious but unpaid position, was his son, Judge Alastair Cole. The connection was no longer circumstantial. It was a clear through line of influence. Here was the modern version of the old playbook. No need for anonymous tip-offs when you could use a PAC to purchase political influence. Judge Cole, using his name and his father's money, had a direct line to the very council members who had torpedoed the Maxwells' chance to expand. He couldn't have cast a vote himself, but he didn't need to. A quiet word, a concerned phone call from a respected judge and the son of a major donor to a council member's chief of staff would be all it took. He could express his personal reservations about the Maxwell project, and the message would be clearly understood. Evans felt a cold anger settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about a frame-up anymore. This was a systematic campaign of oppression. For years, Alastair Cole had been working in the shadows to ensure the Maxwell family remained pinned down, unable to rise. He was using his power not just as a judge, but as a Cole, leveraging his family's wealth and influence to continue a vendetta. The vandalism charge against Leo wasn't the beginning of the attack, it was the end game. It was the final, brutal move designed to not just hamstring the family business, but to destroy Leo's life and reputation, effectively ending the Maxwell legacy for good. He brought his findings to Wallace. She reviewed the documents, her expression grim. "He's using his position as a shield," she said, her voice tight with fury. "He does his dirt on the political side, knowing no one would ever suspect a judge of meddling in zoning disputes. It's brilliant in a sick way." She looked at Evans, a new level of respect in her eyes. "This is what we needed. This establishes motive and a pattern of malicious intent. It gives context to the burner phone calls. A prosecutor will see this and understand that the vandalism case isn't an isolated incident. It's the culmination of a long-running, one-sided war." The moral outrage was satisfying, but Wallace, ever the pragmatist, brought them back to the hard facts. "This is great, Evans, but it's still indirect. We have a motive, we have a suspicious call, but we still don't have the hand that held the spray can. We need to find the accomplice, and I think I know how." Sergeant Wallace's new strategy shifted the investigation from the digital world of phone records and financial statements to the physical world of asphalt and surveillance. Cole's accomplice had to get to the neighborhood somehow, she reasoned, standing in front of a large map of Crestwood Hills in her office. Mr. Henderson heard a car. That means he drove. And if he drove, he might have been caught on camera somewhere else, somewhere Cole couldn't control. The judge's home security system had been a tool for deception, but the city was blanketed with other cameras, traffic cams, ATM cams, storefront security, all impassive, objective witnesses. Their focus narrowed to the hours leading up to the 4:28 a.m. phone call. Wallace submitted another series of carefully worded requests, this time for traffic camera footage from all major access roads leading into the Crestwood Hills area. It was a massive data dump, hours of footage from a dozen different cameras. For 2 days, Evans and Wallace sat in a dark viewing room, their eyes burning from staring at grainy, time-stamped video, watching the lonely, nocturnal traffic of the city. They watched garbage trucks make their rounds, newspaper delivery vans, and the occasional car driven by a shift worker or an insomniac. They were looking for a ghost. They didn't know the make or model of the car, only that Mr. Henderson had described its engine as quiet. They started cross-referencing every vehicle that appeared on more than one camera heading in the direction of the judge's neighborhood between 2 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. The process was agonizingly slow. One by one, they eliminated cars: a pizza delivery driver, a woman who they later confirmed was a nurse heading home from the hospital, a group of college kids returning from a late-night study session. Finally, they found it: a dark-colored, late-model sedan. It wasn't flashy, the kind of car that blended in everywhere. It first appeared on a camera 5 miles away at 3:55 a.m., heading toward Crestwood Hills. Then at 4:10 a.m. it was spotted again, much closer, turning onto the main boulevard that led into the subdivision. And then at 4:20 a.m., a camera on an intersection just 2 blocks from the judge's street captured it making a final turn. It was the only vehicle that followed this precise trajectory within that time frame. "That's our car," Wallace said, her voice a low, triumphant hum. She zoomed in on the image, trying to get a clear shot of the license plate. The angle was bad and the light was poor, but she managed to isolate a few partial characters. It wasn't enough for a positive ID, but it was a start. Evans, however, was looking at something else. "Sergeant," he said, pointing to the screen, "look at the driver." The image was blurry, but the silhouette was clear. A man, alone in the car. But it was the car itself that caught Evans's attention. He had a nagging feeling he had seen it before. He pulled out his phone and navigated to the Maxwell & Son Construction social media page, to the photo of Leo and his father at their last big job. In the background of the photo, parked across the street from the work site, was another car. It was partially obscured, but the color and the distinctive shape of the headlights matched the sedan from the traffic cam footage. It was a long shot, but the implication was staggering. What if the accomplice wasn't just there that night? Evans mused aloud. What if he was watching Leo before the incident? This new theory opened up another avenue of investigation. Wallace, using the partial plate and the new context, expanded her search. She wasn't just looking for footage from the night of the crime anymore. She requested footage from the streets around Leo Maxwell's home and workplace for the 3 days leading up to the vandalism. The payoff was immediate and chilling. They found the same dark sedan on footage from a deli security camera across the street from Leo's apartment. The car was parked for hours, a silent predator. The next day, it was seen on a traffic camera near a job site where Leo was working. The driver was clearly conducting surveillance. The ghost now had a habit. He wasn't just a hired hand for a single night. He was a stalker, gathering information, learning Leo's routines. And on the footage from the deli, they finally got their break. The driver of the sedan got out of the car to buy a coffee. He walked directly in front of the high-definition camera, his face clear as day for a full 10 seconds. He was a man in his late 40s, with thinning hair, a weary face, and the unmistakable look of someone who had seen too much. Wallace ran the image through the department's facial recognition database. It took less than a minute for a match to come back. "Frank Mercer," Wallace read from the screen, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "Ex-cop, did 15 years with the department before washing out, bounced around as a security consultant for a while. For the last 5 years, he's been a licensed private investigator." Mercer specialized in corporate espionage and background checks. He was a hired gun, a man who knew how to operate in the shadows and bend the rules without breaking them, or at least without getting caught. And at the bottom of his professional profile was a single, damning detail. One of his first major clients after leaving the force, a client who had reportedly kept him on a quiet retainer for years, was the law firm that handled all corporate legal matters for coal development. The connection was made. They had found the judge's ghost. Finding Frank Mercer was easy. His PI agency was listed in a small third-floor office in a drab downtown building. Convincing him to talk would be the hard part. He was an ex-cop. He knew the game, he knew their tactics, and he would know his rights. A direct confrontation was risky. If he lawyered up immediately, they would lose their chance to get a voluntary statement. Wallace and Evans decided on a softer approach first. They would approach him on a pretext, gauge his reaction, and see if they could rattle his cage. They found him coming out of his office building, heading for a nearby coffee shop. He moved with a slight limp, a souvenir from his days on the force, and his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, a habit that never went away. Evans and Wallace intercepted him on the sidewalk. "Frank Mercer?" Wallace asked, her tone casual as if she were greeting an old friend. Mercer stopped, his eyes narrowing instantly. He looked from Wallace to Evans, his professional composure a solid wall. "Who's asking?" Wallace flashed her badge. "Sergeant Regina Wallace, this is Officer Evans. We'd like to ask you a few questions about a case we're working on." "I'm on my lunch break," Mercer said, his voice flat and non-committal. He made no move to run or resist, but his body was tense, ready for a fight or flight he hadn't yet chosen. "This won't take long," Evans said, stepping forward slightly. "We're investigating a series of burglaries in the Crestwood Hills area. We have reason to believe you may have been in the vicinity around the time of one of the incidents." They were using the same cover story Wallace had used for the data requests, a flimsy but deniable premise. A flicker of something, recognition, maybe fear, passed through Mercer's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Crestwood Hills? Don't think I've had any business there recently. I'd have to check my logs." His denial was smooth, practiced. "We have traffic cam footage of your vehicle on the night of the 10th, Wallace pressed, her voice still conversational, but with an underlying edge of steel. "A dark gray sedan. License plate begins with a 50Z. She had intentionally used the partial plate, a small tell to show him they had more than just a vague suspicion. Mercer's composure didn't crack, but Evans noticed his right hand twitch, a small, involuntary movement. "I drive a common car, Sergeant. There are probably 100 like it in the city. But not all of them were also parked across the street from Leo Maxwell's apartment for 6 hours the day before, were they?" Evans interjected, dropping the name like a stone into a quiet pond. This time the reaction was undeniable. Mercer's jaw tightened, and a pale, sallow look came over his face. He had not expected them to connect his surveillance of Leo to the incident in Crestwood Hills. He had compartmentalized his jobs, but they had just kicked down the wall between them. "I don't know who that is," Mercer lied, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Look, I'm a private investigator. My client list is confidential. If you want to talk to me officially, you can have my lawyer call your DA." He was trying to regain control, to push them back into official channels where he could hide behind legal procedure. Wallace knew this was the critical moment. She took a step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Listen to me, Frank. We both know you were a good cop once. You took a pension and a bad knee and went private. Nothing wrong with that. But we also both know who you've worked for. We know who signs your checks. And we know that the man you're protecting right now is not worth throwing the rest of your life away for." She let the words hang in the air. She wasn't accusing him of a crime directly. She was appealing to the ghost of the cop he used to be. She was offering him a way out that wasn't a confession, but a choice. "This conversation is over," Mercer said, his voice strained. He turned and walked away, his limp more pronounced than before. He didn't run. He retreated. As they watched him go, Evans felt a pang of uncertainty. "He didn't break, Sergeant." "No," Wallace agreed, a thoughtful look on her face. "But he bent. Did you see his face when you mentioned Leo's name? He's not a hardened criminal, Evans. He's a guy who took a dirty job for a paycheck. He's in over his head and he knows it. Right now, he's scared. He's going to make a phone call, and it won't be to his lawyer. It'll be to his client. He's going to tell Judge Cole that the police are sniffing around, and he's going to see how his powerful client reacts." Wallace's prediction was shrewd. They hadn't gotten a confession, but they had achieved something just as valuable. They had rattled the accomplice. They had pushed him from the safety of the shadows into the harsh light of their investigation. A scared man makes mistakes, and Frank Mercer was a very scared man. His carefully constructed wall of deniability had just been shattered, and now he was a liability to his employer. They had lit a fuse, and now they just had to wait and see which way the explosion would go. Frank Mercer's rattled demeanor was a victory, but a psychological one. In the world of law, it meant nothing without proof. Sergeant Wallace knew that their next move had to be decisive and legally sound. Their case against Judge Cole was still a web of circumstantial evidence. A historical feud, suspicious phone calls, a pattern of political influence, and a private investigator who was clearly involved but had admitted nothing. They needed a direct, irrefutable link. They needed to follow the money. Cole had to pay him, Wallace said to Evans back in her office, the map of the city still on her wall, now dotted with pins marking their key locations. Mercer is a professional. He wouldn't get his hands dirty for free, and a job this risky, framing someone at the behest of a sitting judge, the price tag would be high. If we can find that payment, we can tie Cole directly to Mercer and the frame-up. The only way to do that was with a search warrant for Frank Mercer's financial records, his bank accounts, his business ledgers, his credit card statements. But getting that warrant would be the biggest gamble of their careers. The affidavit for a search warrant has to be presented to a judge, a magistrate, who decides if there is sufficient probable cause to approve it. In this case, they would be presenting an affidavit that, by necessity, accused another sitting judge of orchestrating a felony. The political fallout could be catastrophic. If they took their request to the wrong magistrate, one who was a friend of Cole's, or one who was too timid to challenge the establishment, it would be denied instantly. Worse, word would get back to Judge Cole immediately that he was the target of a formal investigation. He would have time to cover his tracks, to destroy evidence, to use his immense power to crush them before they even got started. "We have one shot at this," Wallace said, her expression grave. "We need a magistrate who is independent, fearless, and has a reputation for being absolutely by the book. Someone who will look at the facts of the affidavit and nothing else." She spent a day making discreet inquiries, calling on old contacts in the DA's office, feeling out the judicial landscape. She finally settled on a name, Judge Isabella Romano. Romano was a former public defender who had been appointed to the bench 5 years ago. She was known for being tough but fair, and she had no love for the city's old money political establishment. She owed no favors to the Coles or their allies. She was their best and only hope. For the next 2 days, Evans and Wallace worked tirelessly, drafting the affidavit. It was the most important document Evans had ever helped write. They laid out their case with painstaking precision, starting from the very first flicker of doubt in his mind. Every detail was included. Mr. Henderson's testimony about the car, the inconsistencies in the security footage, the history of the Cole-Maxwell feud, the analysis of the burner phone calls, the pattern of political intimidation, the traffic camera footage tracking Mercer's car, and their recent tense encounter with Mercer himself. They built a wall of evidence, brick by brick, creating a narrative so compelling and logical that it would be, they hoped, impossible to dismiss. Evans typed the final sentences, his hands aching. He read the document over and over, checking for any weakness, any loophole a skeptical judge could use to deny them. It was the story of their investigation, a testament to weeks of secret, off-the-books work. The next morning, they went to the courthouse. Not the main, grand building where Judge Cole presided, but a smaller, ancillary courthouse where magistrates like Judge Romano handled warrants and arraignments. The air was thick with tension as they waited to be called into her chambers. Evans felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Everything, Leo Maxwell's freedom, his own career, Wallace's reputation, rested on what would happen in the next 30 minutes. Judge Romano was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with intelligent, searching eyes. She read their affidavit in complete silence, her face betraying no emotion. She turned each page slowly, absorbing every word. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Evans could hear the ticking of the clock on her wall, each tick a countdown to the end of his career or the beginning of justice for Leo. Finally, she set the document down. She looked at Wallace, then at Evans, her gaze lingering on the young officer for a moment. "Sergeant Wallace, you have built a strong circumstantial case," she said, her voice even. She then turned her focus to Evans. "Officer Evans, you understand that by signing your name to this affidavit, you are formally accusing a Superior Court judge of multiple felonies. If your evidence is found to be fabricated or your reasoning flawed, the consequences for you will be severe." "I understand, Your Honor," Evans said, his voice coming out stronger than he felt. "I stand by every word in that document." Judge Romano held his gaze for another long moment, then picked up a pen. With a firm, deliberate stroke of her pen, she signed the warrant. "You have your probable cause," she said, her tone all business. "Find the proof, but be advised, you have just kicked a hornet's nest. Make sure you're not the ones who get stung." They walked out of her chambers with the signed warrant in hand. It felt like the heaviest piece of paper in the world. They had their key, but they had also officially declared war on one of the most powerful men in the city. There was no turning back now. The warrant, once signed by Judge Romano, entered the official system. It was a digital thunderclap that Evans and Wallace knew would not go unnoticed for long. They had only a small window of time to serve it on Frank Mercer's bank before the institutional immune system of the city's power structure kicked in. But even they were surprised by how quickly it happened. The next morning, less than 24 hours after their meeting with Judge Romano, Evans was summoned to the precinct captain's office. Captain Miller was a political animal, a man who had climbed the ladder by being a competent administrator who never, ever made waves. His office was a reflection of his personality, neat, impersonal, and sterile. Framed photos of him with the mayor and the chief of police lined the walls. Evans stood before the captain's large mahogany desk, his posture rigid. Captain Miller didn't ask him to sit. He stood up, walked to the window overlooking the precinct parking lot, and spoke with his back to Evans. "I had a very interesting phone call this morning, officer," Miller began, his voice dangerously calm. "From the presiding judge of the Superior Court. He was concerned. He'd been made aware of a search warrant issued yesterday, a warrant for the financial records of a private investigator. An investigator who, it seems, has done some work for Judge Alistair Cole's family in the past." He turned around slowly, his eyes cold and hard. "The affidavit for that warrant had your name on it, Evans, and Sergeant Wallace's. The presiding judge was curious why two of my officers were conducting what appears to be a shadow investigation into one of his most respected colleagues, based on what he called a foundation of rumor and innuendo." Evans's blood ran cold. He had expected pushback, but this was a direct strike from the top of the judicial hierarchy. Judge Cole hadn't confronted them himself. He had his boss call their boss. It was a classic power play. "Captain, we have developed significant probable cause to believe that a crime was committed, and that Judge Cole is involved," Evans said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The evidence is detailed in the affidavit." "I've read the affidavit," Miller countered, walking back to his desk. He leaned against it, his arms crossed. "And what I see is a house of cards built by a rookie who's barely learned his patrol routes and a veteran sergeant who should know better. You're basing a career-ending accusation on a family feud from the 1990s and a handful of phone calls. Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice rose slightly, the calm facade cracking to reveal the pressure he was under. "You haven't just kicked a hornet's nest, as I'm sure Judge Romano told you. You have taken a sledgehammer to it. The mayor's office has called. The chief's office has called. They want to know why my department is launching a witch hunt against Judge Cole, a man who headlines charity dinners and sends crooks to prison. They want to know why I've lost control of my own people." Evans stood his ground. "Sir, with all due respect, Our job is to investigate crimes, regardless of who is involved." Captain Miller let out a short, harsh laugh. "That's academy talk, Evans. Out here in the real world, there are lines you don't cross. And you and Wallace just pole vaulted over one. I'm telling you this for your own good. This path you're on, it ends badly. For you. Sergeant Wallace has a long record. She might survive this with a demotion and a transfer to the property room. But you? You're on probation. You're disposable." The threat was no longer implied. It was explicit. Back off, or you're finished. "This warrant has been signed by a magistrate," Evans said, his jaw tight. "We are legally obligated to see it through." "Obligation is a funny word," Miller said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You also have an obligation to this department. An obligation not to bring a political firestorm down on all our heads because of a gut feeling. I can't officially order you to stop, but I can strongly advise you. Let the warrant be served. See what it turns up. And if it turns up nothing, and believe me, a man like Cole doesn't make mistakes that a simple bank record search can find, then you will drop this. You will file a concluding report, and you will forget any of this ever happened. Is that understood?" It was a conditional threat, a final warning. Miller was giving them one last chance to walk away without being destroyed. "Understood, Captain," Evans said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He walked out of the sterile office, the captain's warning echoing in his ears. The pressure was immense, coming from every direction. The entire system was closing ranks to protect one of its own. He found Wallace in the hallway waiting for him. She knew exactly why he'd been called in. "What did the king's messenger have to say?" she asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. "He told me to stand down before I get myself fired," Evans replied grimly. Wallace nodded, unsurprised. "Let them make their calls. Let them issue their threats. It just proves one thing." "What's that?" "They're scared," she said, a fierce, determined glint in her eye. "And scared men make mistakes. Let's go see what Mercer's bank has to tell us. It's time to find one." Armed with the warrant and fueled by the captain's warning, Evans and Wallace didn't waste a second. They drove directly to the downtown headquarters of the bank that held Frank Mercer's business accounts. The sterile corporate environment of the bank's legal compliance department was a world away from the gritty reality of police work. After presenting the warrant, they were led to a conference room to wait while a team of bank officials retrieved the requested records. The wait was agonizing, each minute stretching as Evans imagined Judge Cole and his powerful allies making more phone calls, pulling more strings, trying to stop them. Finally, a senior compliance officer entered the room carrying a thick stack of printed statements and a flash drive. "These are the complete transaction histories for Mr. Mercer's business checking and savings accounts for the past 90 days, as requested by the warrant," the officer said formally. Back in Wallace's office, with the door locked, they began to sift through the data. At first, it looked exactly like Captain Miller had predicted, a dead end. Mercer's business account showed a steady stream of legitimate-looking payments from various clients, law firms, insurance companies, and corporations. There were no large, suspicious cash deposits, and most disappointingly, there was no payment of any kind from Judge Alistair Cole or any entity directly associated with his name. "He was too smart for that," Evans said, a wave of frustration washing over him. "He wouldn't have paid him from his personal account." "Of course not," Wallace agreed, her eyes scanning the pages with intense focus. "But the money had to come from somewhere. Mercer took a huge risk. He would have demanded a premium. We're looking for a large, unusual payment, something that doesn't fit his normal business pattern." They continued to dig, line by painstaking line. They cross-referenced every incoming payment with a database of known businesses. Everything checked out. Evans felt a pit forming in his stomach. Was the captain right? Had they risked everything for nothing? Was Cole really that untouchable? And then Wallace stopped. "Wait a minute," she said, her finger tracing a single line on a statement dated 2 days after the vandalism incident. "Look at this." It was a wire transfer for $50,000. It was by far the largest single payment Mercer had received in the last 3 months. 50 grand, Evans breathed. That's a hell of a premium for a simple vandalism job. It's not just for the job, Wallace countered. It's for the risk. It's hush money. Now look at the source. The payment had come from an entity called Oak Ridge Properties, LLC. On the surface, it looked like just another real estate company, another one of Mercer's corporate clients. Evans's heart sank. It was probably just another dead end, another shell company impossible to trace. But Wallace was already typing the name into her computer, navigating through the state's corporate commission database. Every LLC has to have a registered agent and a list of managing members, she explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard. They can hide behind corporate veils, but somewhere there has to be a name. She pulled up the official registration documents for Oak Ridge Properties, LLC. The company had been formed only 6 months ago. Its registered address was a P.O. box at a mail stop facility. Its stated purpose was real estate investment and management. It was designed to look anonymous. But then they scrolled down to the section listing the LLC's principal owner and sole managing member. The name on the screen was not Alistair Cole. It was a name neither of them recognized. Catherine Wexler. For a moment, disappointment washed over Evans again. But Wallace wasn't deterred. "Who is Catherine Wexler?" she murmured, already opening a new search tab. She ran the name through a comprehensive background check database, one that linked family members, addresses, and known associates. A few seconds later, the result appeared on the screen, and the entire conspiracy snapped into focus with the force of a physical blow. Catherine Wexler was Judge Alistair Cole's maternal aunt, and her maiden name, the name she had used before she married, was Cole. She was Jonathan Cole's younger sister. "It's a family affair," Wallace said, her voice a low, furious whisper. "He didn't use his own name. He didn't even use his father's name. He used his aunt. He set up a shell company in her name and funneled the money through it. It's one step removed, just enough to be deniable if anyone ever looked casually." They had it. The smoking gun. The undeniable, irrefutable link. $50,000 transferred from a shell company secretly controlled by Judge Cole's family into the bank account of the man they had proven was stalking Leo Maxwell and was present at the scene of the crime. This was the piece of evidence that a defense attorney couldn't explain away. This wasn't a coincidence or a misunderstanding. This was the digital trail of a corrupt payment. It was the receipt for a purchased crime. Evans looked at the screen, at the web of names and shell companies, and felt a surge of cold, hard triumph. Captain Miller was wrong. The presiding judge was wrong. Everyone who had warned them, threatened them, and stood in their way was wrong. Judge Alistair Cole was not untouchable. He had made a mistake, and they had just found it. Their house of cards was now a fortress of proof. The proof of payment changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. Frank Mercer was no longer just a person of interest. He was the linchpin of their case, the man whose testimony could connect the money to the crime. With the financial records in hand, they now had the leverage to break him. There would be no more soft approaches on the sidewalk. This time, they would bring the full weight of the law to his doorstep. Evans and Wallace, accompanied by 2 other uniformed officers, arrived at Mercer's small downtown office early the next morning. They didn't need a warrant to talk to him, but the presence of the uniformed officers was a clear signal that this was not a friendly chat. They found Mercer at his desk, a cup of coffee in his hand, looking pale and sleep-deprived. He looked up as they entered, and the color drained completely from his face. He had clearly been expecting them. "Frank Mercer, we need you to come with us to the precinct to answer some questions regarding your involvement in an ongoing felony investigation," Wallace said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Mercer didn't protest. He didn't call his lawyer. He simply nodded, a look of weary resignation on his face. The fight had gone out of him. He placed his hands on the desk, waiting to be cuffed, but Wallace shook her head. "You're not under arrest, Frank. You're coming voluntarily. For now." The unspoken threat was clear. His status could change at any moment. In the stark, windowless interrogation room at the precinct, the atmosphere was heavy. Mercer sat at the small metal table, staring at his hands. Evans and Wallace sat opposite him. The usual interrogation tactics, good cop, bad cop, were unnecessary here. Mercer was an ex-cop. He knew all the tricks. They had to use the one thing he couldn't fight: the truth. Wallace started, her tone matter-of-fact. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the bank statement showing the $50,000 wire transfer from Oak Ridge Properties, LLC. $50,000, Frank, Wallace said quietly. That's a lot of money for a simple surveillance job. We both know what this was for. This was your payment for framing Leo Maxwell. Mercer stared at the paper but said nothing. We know about Oak Ridge Properties, Evans added, his voice firm. We know it's a shell company registered to Catherine Wexler. We know she's Judge Cole's aunt. The money trail is clean and it leads right back to the judge's family. We have you, Frank. We have the car. We have you on camera stalking the victim. And we have the payment. They laid out the entire case for him, piece by piece, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. They showed him the traffic cam photos of his car. They told him about the burner phone records. They demonstrated with cold, hard evidence that every lie he could possibly tell was already useless. They had him trapped in a cage of his own actions. Mercer finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. He told me it would be simple, he whispered, his voice hoarse. He said the kid was a troublemaker, that he was shaking down his family for money. He just wanted to teach him a lesson, scare him a little. He said no one would ever look twice at it. And then the dam broke. For the next hour, Frank Mercer confessed to everything. The story poured out of him, a torrent of guilty admissions. He explained how Judge Cole had contacted him through the family law firm, hiring him for an off-the-books job. Cole had fed him a story about Leo Maxwell being a low-level extortionist who had a grudge against his family. His job was to create a situation where Maxwell would be arrested for a minor but reputation-damaging crime. Mercer detailed the entire plan. He had followed Leo for days, learning his routine, and had even acquired a hoodie and shoes that matched what Leo often wore for work. He was the one who bought the burner phone. On the night of the incident, he had parked in the blind spot of the judge's camera, just as Evans had suspected. Judge Cole had remotely disabled the camera system, then enabled it only for the 30 seconds it took for Mercer to commit the act of vandalism. The footage was then carefully edited by Cole himself to show a seamless, damning narrative. The face on the video that Cole had identified as Leo Maxwell was, in fact, Mercer's own, intentionally obscured by the hood and the poor lighting. Cole had simply told the police who he wanted it to be. He planned everything, Mercer said, his voice laced with a bitter mix of awe and resentment. He was meticulous. He had an answer for everything. He assured me it was foolproof, that his position as a judge made him untouchable. Why did you do it, Frank? Evans asked, his anger tempered by a sliver of pity for the broken man in front of him. You were a cop. You knew this was wrong. Mercer let out a hollow laugh. Money. It's always money. My wife has medical bills, my kid's in college. I was drowning in debt. Cole offered me 50 grand. It was enough to solve all my problems. I convinced myself I was just doing a job, that it was just a rich man's squabble. I didn't want to think about the kid. With his confession, the case was sealed. Mercer, in exchange for a plea deal and his full cooperation, agreed to provide a sworn, videotaped testimony against Judge Alistair Cole. He would be the prosecution's star witness. As Evans watched the ex-cop recount the sordid details of the conspiracy, he felt no joy, only a profound sense of sadness. Mercer was a man who had lost his way, a man who had traded his honor for a paycheck. But his confession had given them the final weapon they needed. They now had the accomplice, the money, the motive, and the method. All that was left was to arrest the architect. Frank Mercer's confession was the keystone that locked the entire structure of their case into place. But Wallace and Evans knew that arresting a sitting judge required more than just a confession from a compromised accomplice. The case had to be absolutely airtight, a fortress of evidence so formidable that no high-priced legal team could breach its walls. The political pressure they had faced so far would be nothing compared to the firestorm that would erupt once Judge Cole was charged. They had one chance to get this right, and there was no margin for error. They took their findings not to Captain Miller, who they knew would try to bury it, but directly to a trusted contact of Wallace's in the district attorney's office, Assistant District Attorney Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a career prosecutor, a sharp, ambitious man in his 40s with a reputation for taking on tough, high-profile cases and winning them. He was also known to have no political love for the city's old guard. They met in a secure conference room in the DA's building, a neutral ground away from the prying eyes of the police precinct. For hours, Evans and Wallace walked Thorne through the entire investigation, from the initial incident report to Mercer's videotaped confession. They laid out the physical evidence, the digital trail, and the deep-seated motive, presenting him with a comprehensive file containing every document, every photograph, and every log they had compiled. Thorne listened with intense concentration, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He interrupted only to ask sharp, probing questions, testing the strength of their evidence, looking for weaknesses a defense attorney would exploit. Mercer's testimony is powerful, Thorne said after reviewing the confession tape, but he's a paid accomplice who has been given a plea deal. Cole's defense will paint him as an unreliable liar trying to save his own skin. His testimony needs to be corroborated by every piece of physical and digital evidence we have. For the next week, the three of them worked in secret, operating like a covert task force. They meticulously re-examined every piece of evidence through the eyes of a prosecutor. They subpoenaed the original unedited security footage from the manufacturer of Judge Cole's security system, using Mercer's testimony to prove the files on Cole's personal server had been tampered with. The original files showed a time gap, proving the system had been turned off and on, just as Mercer had described. They had forensic experts enhance the traffic camera footage, creating a clearer image of Mercer in the driver's seat of his car near the crime scene. They created complex timelines and charts that visually linked the burner phone calls, Mercer's movements, and the $50,000 wire transfer. They even brought in a forensic accountant from the DA's office to produce a report officially tracing the funds from Jonathan Cole's financial network through the Shell LLC to Frank Mercer, leaving no doubt about the money's origin and destination. They also formally interviewed Leo Maxwell and his sister in a secure location. With the assurance that he was now considered the victim of a crime, not the perpetrator, Leo provided a detailed, emotional account of his ordeal. His sister corroborated his alibi with phone records and receipts that proved he had been with her family the entire morning of the incident. Their statements provided the crucial human element to the case, illustrating the real-world damage caused by Cole's actions. As they worked, Evans felt a profound shift in his role. He was no longer just a cop following a hunch. He was a key part of a major prosecution team, helping to build a historic case. He learned more about the law and the intricacies of building a criminal case in that 1 week than he had in his entire time at the academy. He saw how every piece of evidence, no matter how small, became a vital thread in the larger tapestry of guilt. Finally, after a week of relentless work, Thorne leaned back in his chair. "It's ironclad," he announced, a rare smile touching his lips. "We have motive, means, and opportunity. We have a financial trail. We have a cooperating accomplice whose testimony is corroborated by independent forensic evidence. We have proof of evidence tampering. And we have an innocent victim whose life was nearly destroyed." He looked at Wallace and Evans. "It's time. I'm taking this to the grand jury tomorrow to secure an indictment. Once that's done, I'll sign the arrest warrant myself." He paused, his expression turning serious. "Judge Alistair Cole is about to find out that the law applies to everyone, even those who sit on the bench." The moment was finally at hand. The secret investigation, born from a rookie's gut feeling, was about to become the biggest legal scandal the city had ever seen. Evans felt a sense of grim finality. The hunt was over. The day of reckoning was about to begin, and he knew who had to be the one to serve the warrant. It had started with him in that driveway, and it had to end with him. The arrest was scheduled for the following afternoon, a calculated move by ADA Thorne. He wanted it to happen in the one place Judge Cole felt most powerful, most untouchable: the courthouse. Thorne wanted the arrest to be a public spectacle, a clear and unambiguous message that no one was above the law. The indictment from the grand jury had been handed down that morning, sealed until the moment of the arrest. The warrant, signed by Thorne, cited multiple felony counts: conspiracy, perjury, evidence tampering, and solicitation to commit a crime. Evans spent the morning in a state of controlled anxiety. He polished his boots, pressed his uniform, and mentally rehearsed the procedure. This would be the most significant act of his career, and he knew it would be scrutinized, analyzed, and replayed on the news for weeks to come. He was no longer just Officer Evans, the rookie. He was about to become the face of a seismic event in the city's history. He met Sergeant Wallace and two plainclothes detectives from the DA's office in the courthouse parking garage. Wallace placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You ready for this, kid?" she asked, her voice steady. "I am," Evans said, and to his own surprise he found that it was true. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued him for weeks had been replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. They walked into the courthouse through a side entrance, bypassing the main security checkpoint. The building was bustling with its usual activity: lawyers rushing to meetings, defendants waiting nervously on benches, the low hum of a system of justice at work. It felt surreal to be walking through these halls, knowing they were about to bring a part of that very system crashing down. They learned that Judge Cole was currently presiding over a routine civil case in his courtroom on the 4th floor. Thorne's plan was to wait until the court was in recess to make the arrest, to minimize disruption and maintain a degree of professional decorum. They took up positions in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, their presence going largely unnoticed in the sea of faces. After what felt like an eternity, the doors to the courtroom opened, and a bailiff announced the midday recess. A few minutes later, Judge Alistair Cole emerged, walking from the courtroom toward the private corridor that led to his chambers. He was laughing at a comment made by one of the lawyers, his demeanor as confident and commanding as it had been that first day in his driveway. He saw them then. He saw Sergeant Wallace. He saw the two detectives, and then his eyes landed on Officer David Evans, standing there in his crisp police uniform. For a fraction of a second, Cole's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance, crossed his face. He clearly assumed they were there to consult with him on some minor police matter. "Officer Evans, Sergeant Wallace," he said, his tone a mixture of surprise and condescension. "This is a highly unusual place for a meeting. Is there something I can help you with?" Evans stepped forward, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm in his chest. He held up the arrest warrant. "Judge Alistair Cole," he said, his voice clear and unwavering, ringing out in the suddenly quiet hallway. "I have a warrant for your arrest." The effect was instantaneous. Cole's face went from confident to utterly stunned. The color drained from his cheeks. He stared at the warrant, then back at Evans, his mind clearly unable to process what was happening. The laughter and conversation in the hallway died down as people began to stare, sensing the gravity of the moment. "This is absurd," Cole stammered, his voice losing its authoritative timbre. "This is some kind of a joke." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds of conspiracy to commit a crime, perjury, and tampering with evidence in the case of the state versus Leo Maxwell," Evans recited, his training taking over. "Sir, you need to place your hands behind your back." The judge looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to step in and stop this insanity. He saw only the shocked faces of his colleagues and the unblinking, resolute expressions of the officers. His mask of judicial authority crumbled, revealing the panicked, cornered man beneath. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life." "The only mistake was yours, Judge," Wallace said quietly from behind him. Evans took out his handcuffs. With practiced efficiency, he instructed the judge to turn around. For a moment, Cole resisted, his body rigid with indignant fury. But then, faced with the calm determination of the officers, he seemed to deflate. His shoulders slumped. He turned and placed his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs locking around the judge's wrists was a small, sharp sound, but it echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Officer David Evans, the 6-week rookie, had just arrested the man he was once supposed to believe without question. He had brought down a giant. As he led the stunned, silent judge through the hushed and staring crowds, Evans knew that nothing in the city, or in his own life, would ever be the same again. The arrest of Judge Alistair Cole sent shockwaves through the city that were felt for months. The story was a media sensation, leading every newscast and newspaper front page. The image of the young, respected judge being led in handcuffs by the rookie black officer who had dared to question him became an iconic symbol of the scandal. The case against him was, as ADA Thorne had predicted, ironclad. Faced with Frank Mercer's detailed testimony, the undeniable financial trail, and the forensic proof of his evidence tampering, Cole's high-priced legal team could do little. After a trial that captivated the city, a jury took less than 5 hours to find him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 10 years in state prison, a stunning fall from grace for a man who had once been the arbiter of other men's fates. The legal and financial consequences for the city were immense. All charges against Leo Maxwell were immediately dropped, and he was released from jail with a formal apology from the district attorney's office. His family, represented by a top civil rights firm, filed a massive lawsuit against the city, citing malicious prosecution, conspiracy, and a violation of civil rights. Rather than endure a long and costly legal battle they knew they would lose, the city settled. Leo Maxwell received a settlement of $8, $5 million, compensation for the 4 months he had spent in jail and the near total destruction of his life and reputation. His family's business, once on the brink of failure, was suddenly infused with the capital it needed to not only recover, but to thrive. Justice, in this case, had come with a hefty price tag. Within the police department, the changes were equally significant. Captain Miller was quietly transferred to an administrative role in a forgotten corner of the city bureaucracy. The case had exposed his willingness to sacrifice justice for political expediency, and his career was effectively over. Sergeant Regina Wallace, on the other hand, was hailed as a hero. Her integrity and courage were lauded by the new police chief, and she was promoted to lieutenant, tasked with heading a new, specially created public integrity unit designed to investigate corruption within the system itself. And as for Officer David Evans, he was no longer the rookie. He became the youngest officer in the department's history to receive the Medal of Valor, not for a single act of physical bravery, but for what the citation called moral courage in the face of overwhelming institutional pressure. He had become a reluctant celebrity within the department, a symbol of what a single, principled officer could achieve. He had faced down the system and won. Yet as he stood on the stage to receive his medal, he felt not a sense of triumph, but a profound and heavy sense of responsibility. The case had changed him. He had joined the force with a clear, almost naive belief in the system. Now he saw its cracks, its vulnerabilities, and the dark corners where power could curdle into corruption. He had seen firsthand how easily a life could be ruined by a lie, and how hard it was for the truth to be heard over the roar of influence and authority. His victory was not just a victory for Leo Maxwell, but a victory for the quiet whisper of doubt that he had refused to ignore. As he stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of his fellow officers, city officials, and his proud family, he thought about the journey. It had all started with a knot in his stomach on a sun-drenched suburban street, a feeling that something was profoundly wrong. He had chosen to trust that feeling over the perfect evidence, over the word of a powerful man, and over the advice of his superiors. He had risked everything, and in the end had helped restore a small piece of the justice he had sworn to uphold. The city was now forced to reckon with the reality that corruption could wear a judge's robe just as easily as a ski mask. And it had all happened because one rookie cop chose to listen to a whisper. As the applause fades and the headlines are replaced by the next day's news, what remains is the quiet echo of the choices made. The story of Judge Cole isn't just about a corrupt official. It's a deep dive into the psychology of entitlement. Alistair Cole was a man born into a world where his family's will was reality. The feud with the Maxwells wasn't just a business dispute to him, it was an inherited narrative of an obstacle that needed to be removed. In his mind, the Maxwells weren't people. They were a persistent problem, a symbol of defiance against his family's rightful dominance. His actions, though criminal, likely didn't feel wrong to him. They felt like a necessary, almost righteous correction of the natural order. This narcissistic worldview, shielded by wealth and power, is what made him so dangerous. He wasn't just breaking the law, he believed he was the law. For Officer Evans, this ordeal was a trial by fire. Looking back, one can't help but wonder what might have happened if he had made one different choice. What if Sergeant Wallace hadn't believed him? He would have been a lone voice, easily discredited and dismissed. He might have been forced to leak the story to a journalist, a move that would have ended his police career and painted him as a disgruntled whistleblower rather than a diligent officer. To protect himself better in such a situation, perhaps documenting every single suspicion, every off-the-books conversation, and placing it in the hands of a trusted third party, like a private attorney, would have been his only insurance policy. It's a sobering reminder that sometimes doing the right thing requires preparing for the system to treat you like the enemy. Ultimately, this story is a testament to the immense power of individual integrity. It affirms that systems of power, no matter how intimidating, are composed of people, and people can be held accountable. It took just one person to question the official story, one veteran to lend her support, and one magistrate to honor her oath, to unravel a web of deceit decades in the making. The message is not that the system is perfect, but that it is perfectible, and that its improvement depends entirely on the courage of individuals who are willing to stand for the truth, even when they are standing alone. What do you think is the most difficult part about standing up to authority when you know it's wrong? Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was off, even when everyone else seemed to accept it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please consider subscribing for more stories about the pursuit of justice.